بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to another episode of the Pioneers podcast. Alhamdulillah, today we're delighted to be joined by Dr Asim Yusuf, one of my teachers and mentors. Sheikh, thank you for taking your time out.
Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to you, to everyone else as well.
Thank you. I wanted to go through a few questions with you, but I wanted to utilize a taxonomy I've created as to what it means for a Muslim or any person in general to aspire to be a leader in their communities. So it's what I've called the Pioneers taxonomy. 5 factors, 5 metrics as to which if we analyze and break down our progress in those 5 factors, we can really open our eyes to how we can really self-develop. So the first is intellectual. And I think the polar extreme of that is spiritual. So everything is anchored between the aql and the ruh.
Okay.
So the intellect, the spirit, and then there's the 3 which are kind of coinciding or compartmentalizing or enhancing those 2. One is physical, one is financial, and one is cultural.
Okay.
What do you think about that before we get on to anything further?
So as a taxonomy of the criteria or qualities of leadership. Okay, so you've got intellectual, balanced by spiritual, which of course are terms that need more definition. And then you've got effectively the capacity to, when you say financial, what was it, financial?
Financial, physical, and cultural.
And cultural. What do you, it depends what you mean, I suppose, really. These are domains. These are domains that are worthwhile considering. Physical, I assume, means, well, explain what they mean, then I'll tell you what I think about them.
In terms of the 5, I want to just, in terms of breaking them down, I think in the day and age that we live in, we have a tendency to hyperfixate upon one of those 5 metrics, i.e. some hyperfixate on a financial metric where everything becomes about money. It's just about my career, it's just about my finances. The issue with that is it's a lack or deficiency in the other factors, i.e. if someone's a millionaire, it doesn't
can't buy me love.
Yeah, you can't buy me love. So you can be a millionaire, but you're just a walking ATM at the end of the day if you've got nothing else to enhance that. Other people hyperfixate on spiritual. So they just, mind my language, is just fat mulvis with speaking a foreign language which people can't understand, and there's no relation to the jama'ah, the congregation that they're speaking to. Other people, and they use religion as an escapism for true success or for true belonging. Other people, they hyperfixate upon physical, where it's just about their body, and they lack a manifestation and enhancement of the other factors. So the point I'm trying to make is I think these 5 factors, if one looks at their life and they analyze their life from these 5 factors, and they develop short-term and long-term goals to develop themselves in those 5 ways, I think that's how we create pioneers rather than people who are just following the crowd.
Yeah, so in order to, the word balance, I suppose, is the important thing here, is how you balance between them. So that it's very interesting. I'll tell you, it's interesting from a number of perspectives. The first of them is, have you heard of the biopsychosocial model? So, being a psychiatrist, there is this discussion about whether a mental illness should be looked at in terms of or looked at in terms of the medical model. The medical model is, here is the tissue, here is the part of the body, here is the pathology or the thing that's wrong with it. If you fix the thing that's wrong with it, you fix the issue, right? The symptoms go away, right? So you've got, you've got diabetes. The problem is, your diabetes type 1. The problem is the pancreas cells, the islets of Langerhans. Can you fix them? No. What can you do? Well, you can make up for what they produce, which is give yourself insulin. That's a medical model. The biopsychosocial model is another way of looking at health. So health from a medical model means you are healthy if your body is functioning correctly. The biopsychosocial model is you are healthy if when you are considered as a holistic person in terms of your biology, in terms of your sort of psychological well-being, and in terms of your social well-being, you are healthy from those perspectives. If you have an absence of distress in each of those 3 domains, then you are healthy. Okay? From an Islamic psychotherapy perspective, we'd add a further domain to that, which is the spiritual dimension, the biopsychosocial-spiritual dimension. And all of this is relate to this idea of afia. And afia is kind of a general holistic sense of well-being. All right? Now, the model that you're talking about is quite similar to that. That's the first thing. The second thing that you're looking at, the second thing to consider is the relationship between the maqasid sharia, right, and what are sometimes called the human goods, or Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. Right? Leave the hierarchy bit out, because that hierarchy is very subjective. But the idea that we all need to feel safe, physiologically, psychologically, in terms of community, and so on and so forth. Now, Maslow's hierarchy, very interestingly, kind of maps onto the Maqasid Sharia.
Yeah.
Right? In the sense that, you know, it's about preservation of life and therefore health, preservation of wealth and property, preservation, i.e. financial security, preservation of intellect and, you know, the right to learn and grow in that way, preservation of family and community and connectedness, and then preservation of religion, which is your capacity to know God. So they map to each other, and that's another way of looking at this. You could take your 5 domains and reformulate them as the Maqasid Sharia, where the idea is that what you are seeking, so not the Maqasid as a narrow juristic concept, but the Maqasid Sharia as an overarching framework of religion. What is religion there to do? It is to bring about preservation of these human needs, right? Of these human needs, ultimately, yeah, or of these human desires, and to correctly order them so that the one is prioritized above the other. The third thing to think about, actually, is the concept of Ghazali's concept of the waza'if, the roles and responsibilities of the human being, which he covers in book 10 of the IICA. And what he does there is he says that, effectively, he says that your life is made up of a certain number of responsibilities. So you have responsibilities to yourself, like sleep and eating and that kind of stuff. Responsibilities to God, which is your worship and so forth. Your responsibilities to your family, you have to earn money, or you're doing khidmah, relationships and so on and so forth. And these break down into a number of domains. What's really important, Ghazali says, is that at a particular point in your life, this pie chart of your wazifas should have all 5, but they won't all be the same size. So maybe when you're a student, the most important thing is the learning and the education bit, and the earning is not important. But when you're starting a family or what have you, then maybe the earning bit is hugely important, and maybe the learning bit will have to shrink a little bit. But you need to make sure that in each of those 5 domains, as appropriate to your life in that moment, that you are able to strike a balance and prioritize correctly. So yes, it's in terms of leadership, there is one more thing I would factor in, which should be in between social and religious, which is connectedness. And connectedness here means connectedness to the tradition, right? That's the isnad, the whole isnad thing. Being the idea of a veridical connection through time to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The thing that marks out our religion, ultimately more than anything else, is exactly that we are not orphaned. We are not fruit that have detached from the tree, right? Once a fruit, the minute you detach a fruit from the tree, it starts to rot. Immediately, it starts to rot. Now, it's good enough to eat for a couple of days, 2-3 days, depending on the weather, but it's dying. The moment you detach it from its source of nourishment, it starts to die. And the same thing applies to us. If we are disconnected from the Razaq, if we are disconnected from the source of spiritual nourishment, we also start to decay. Yeah? And this is why are more and more prophets sent to different peoples? Because they've received the message, disconnected from it, and then they need to be reconnected again. Disconnected from it, need to be reconnected to it again. So this idea of that connectedness becomes very, very important. And it also links to the idea of, I think in Christianity it's called servant leadership.
Yep.
So servant leadership, the idea that Sayyidul Qawmi Khadimuhu. So the master of a people is their servant. Yeah? And the idea, I remember, a few of my teachers, a few of my teachers said to me, we have too many programs on Muslim leadership. What we need is a program on Muslim followership.
Wow.
Yeah? We need to learn how to be a follower before you learn how to be a leader. Yeah?
It's amazing.
So I'm not sure if that answered the question. But
you did. I think from a anthropological and a psychological perspective.
But it's worthwhile looking, because sometimes we will, and I've had this, you kind of think, oh, this is really good. But then you look back and you say, okay, has anyone else thought of this before me? Maybe not in exactly the same way. It shouldn't be in exactly the same way. But in a different way, that hence, for example, the maqasid idea. I remember I was talking to psychologists and they were talking about Maslow and it's really helpful and this and that and the other. I said, well, that's basically the Maqasid Sharia.
Basic.
Except
the secular version.
Except that well, this is the point, that it's number one, it's a secular version. Number two, it's 1,000 years beforehand.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Oh, human rights, human rights. Islam has the longest uninterrupted tradition of human rights of any community in history.
SubhanAllah.
The idea of universal human rights Islam has a 1400-year uninterrupted tradition, a systematized tradition in the Muslim world, and it is the longest uninterrupted approach to universal human rights anywhere in the world. But we don't know about these things.
Wow.
We don't know about these things. That's why it's important to know your tradition, and therefore to be literate in your own tradition, in our tradition.
So let's look at the three main, because that's an interesting point. What are the three main comebacks or critiques that one would make of that statement? Number one is slavery in Islam. Number two is women in Islam.
Yeah.
And number three is what's the third one?
Non-Muslims in Islam.
There you go.
Non-Muslims in Islam. So, what is this about? So, each of these three things is an approach to how a right should be formulated from within a particular paradigm. Okay? So, a belief in human rights must entail that men and women are treated exactly the same legally. Okay? How about this? A universal approach to human rights must entail that citizen and non-citizen are treated exactly the same. Exactly the same. Citizen and non-citizen.
How about
right?
social?
If I go to America on holiday in November, why shouldn't I be allowed to vote? Why shouldn't I? I'm a human being. They have a right to have a say in who the leader is. If I spend some time, and let's say I'm staying there and I have a green card or whatever they do in America. I have a green card, but I don't. So why shouldn't I have a vote? Why not? The decision affects me. Right? No, it's only for citizens. Why is it only for citizens? Right? We all make certain dividers, right? Because you have to, at some point, make certain distinctions.
Social contract. Hobbes' social contract.
Well, okay, so you can talk about Hobbes' social contract, and that's one approach to it. Remember, Hobbes' social contract, the other thing to note is that these things are coming out of histories. Where is the Hobbesian idea of a social contract coming from? And how does it relate to his Leviathan?
Yeah.
How does it relate to his Leviathan theory?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And is it this idea, this overweening power that in Hobbes' time, the modern state is able to have over the people? There has to be something to balance that, because the state is a Leviathan. It just has so much control over people's lives. I don't think and I say this to people sometimes, this is a slightly different topic, but we live in the most regulated society in human history. The most surveilled, the most regulated, the most restricted state situation in human history.
Orwellian technocratic Leviathan.
There is so much, in which other, let me give you an example. The Magna Carta, right, which is the foundation document of kind of, the whole British system is based on the Magna Carta, they say.
GCSE history.
It's a long time ago for me. What was the Magna Carta about? Fundamentally, the king cannot simply just choose to levy taxes on the barons, not the people, the barons, whenever he wants to go to war. Right? In other words, we have to have the right to retain our possessions, habeas corpus.
Yep.
We have the right to retain our possessions, our persons, our serfs, and so you can't just come and take them. Right? Now that idea, that idea of the Magna Carta, I'm a consultant, NHS consultant. I probably give about half of the money I earn back to the government. I don't give it, they take it. So the taxation on the Magna Carta, right? I'm a baron.
The right to possess.
I'm a baron. I'm top, I'm that 40% tax earner that you guys will probably never get to because you're too young and AI will take all your jobs. But I am giving with pension, with national insurance, with this, I'm giving half of my money, or half of my money is taken away from me. Why does that not transgress the principle of the Magna Carta? Right? What is the justification? Now, there is a justification for it, which is that on the basis of that, there is housing, there is healthcare, there is social housing, there is healthcare, there are roads, there is a police service, there is all of these things that we take for granted, free education, free healthcare, all these things are paid for from that tax bill. It's not, who is it now? Andy Burnham. It's not Andy Burnham taking all the money for himself and building himself a palace, right? It's taken by the government and it is redistributed to the people.
The economy.
So I've given, when we were studying Ghazali's book 13, where Ghazali has a real go at rulers for levying taxes. Actually, he has a proper right go at rulers for levying tax. Haram, it's this, it's that, it's the other. But when we were having a discussion about this in the class, what I said was, you need to make the niyyah of sadaqah. You make the niyyah of sadaqah, because when you are paying tax, that money is going to somebody's disability living allowance, somebody's education, somebody's ability to call up the police and seek justice, somebody's legal aid, to ensure that when someone's driving down the road, the car doesn't hit a pothole and the tire goes and there's a horrible accident. It is going towards social welfare. And so what you are doing effectively when you pay your taxes is you are giving sadaqah to the less fortunate via the government.
See, the issue with that is the distribution to foreign wars, etc., etc. This is where
the conversation comes from. So, of that amount, when we're doing this, we researched it, and I haven't answered your question yet, but I'm going to come back to it. It's something. The defense budget was something like 3%, I think, of your tax. You can go onto the OBR website, you can check this stuff out. It's about 3%, I think. The vast majority of which, and the vast majority of any department in government, is salaries, right? But then it's for Trident, it's for maintaining the bases, it's for these kinds of things. Now, does Britain need an armed forces?
Of course.
Of course it needs an armed forces, right? It's got to be paid for by someone.
Yep.
How much of a proportion of that money then of your tax money actually goes towards a bomb that drops in Gaza? Now you might say, no amount is too small.
Yep.
It might be 0.01%, but it doesn't matter. I don't want to contribute towards that. Okay, so what do you do about it? Well, that's where you have the right to exercise your vote, change the government, change their position on things, and so forth. It might work, it might not work. Yeah, but that's the right that you have, and therefore have a say in how your tax money is spent. But the question of, but there's human rights, slavery women and non-Muslims. In each society, a decision is made about who gets what's right, who gets what right.
Yep.
Okay? The idea that everyone has some rights that they are owed by other people in the society, everyone has some rights, that is what we mean by universal human rights. What precisely those rights are is something that will vary from place to place, culture to culture, religion to religion, society to society. So to say that because you don't accept our notion of what a right should be, therefore you do not believe in human rights, misses the point.
Anachronistic morality.
It is the idea, as Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad once said, 20th century, he said it, in the 20th century, he said late 20th century mores do not have a right of abrogation over revelation.
Yep.
Right? So in other words,
more subjectivity. And
one of the things that we do in our classes with IICA, particularly the IICA, because it's one of those long meandering classes, as you well know, is we will talk about what is the socio-historical context or the socio-cultural context in which the Imam is making a particular statement.
Yep.
Okay? And we will look to see how what he says may be affected by his own moment, his own historical moment, his own cultural moment, the beliefs, just the general beliefs that you have about things and so on and so forth, and how that might affect how you view a certain thing. But then what we do is we look at our own moment, our own, because we are in a moment. We are in a very specific historical, cultural moment. And the assumptions made in our society inevitably affect us, no more or less than if we had been living in 15th century Turkey, or 15th century Ottoman Turkey, or 12th century, 12th century China, or whatever it happens to be. Recognition of the fact that your universal human rights does not mean a one group's morality and their specific positions on morality must be transhistorically correct.
Yep.
Must be transhistorically true, and therefore everyone else's morality is either correct if it agrees with it or deficient if it disagrees with it. What you are now doing is you are saying that our time is unique. You are saying, effectively, we are at the end of history.
Yep.
We are the most, inverted commas, evolved form of humanity. There is no further evolution of humanity beyond us, and therefore this is the truth. And the difference between a religious perspective and a secular perspective is really about where do you locate perfection? Where is societal, moral, or individual perfection? What is the exemplary version of human perfection? Where is it located? Right? Progressivism effectively means that that ideal state is located in the future, and we are moving towards it. All right? Conservatism, small c, conservatism implies that the ideal state was in the past, and we are trying to, as we move away from it, trying to retain or conserve as much of it as possible. Right? So if you like a religious and secular, you've got the Prophet ﷺ is the absolute exemplar of human perfection. As you move away from, not necessarily in time, but as you move away from the prophetic model, you are moving away from perfection. He is the peak of the mountain, and the further you move away, the further down you are drifting.
So I suppose if you look at it on the timeline, you've got Muslims, we have a kind of romanticization of the past, whereas the West has a nefarious, cynical approach to the future, i.e. in terms of locating the perfection.
I would say that modern society is generally progressive.
Yep.
Even conservatives are progressive.
Yep.
But modern society has an idea. The romanticism and the idealism is about the future,
whereas we have in the past.
In our case, it's about the past.
Just to be slightly pedantic, if we're going to take that, previously the point mentioned in terms of social presuppositions, a liberal might argue, or a modernist might argue, in terms of why, if religion or doctrine is universal and it's transcendental in terms of time and space, why should our moral and social presuppositions blur or taint that text? I.e., why should my ijtihad have, why isn't the text so clear or so straightforward that I didn't need to utilize my moral or social presuppositions to make a judgment?
So in order for that's a good question. In order for and it's not cynical at all. It's a very good question, right? Why isn't Allah just clear about what He wants us to do?
Basically.
Simple, right? Well, it's ijtihad, and the Hanafi say this, and the Shafi'i say that, and the Muslims say this, and the Christians say this. Look, for a truth to be universally applicable, right? It either has to answer every single possible question, right, which would make it impossible to navigate, right? Which would make it impossible to navigate, or it would have to provide a framework within which to answer questions that arise.
Is there no third option?
What's the third option?
Is there?
Maybe a third option, but those are either it provides either everything has an answer, and the answers are all in this big book.
Yep.
Right? To every question imaginable. Right? Think for a minute about praying in space.
Yep.
All right? Let's forget that, praying on a plane.
Window open.
Right? Can you imagine a hadith? We were talking about anachronisms before, guys, right? Yeah. Imagine a hadith that says, if you are flying in the air, right? If you find yourself flying in the air and it is time for the prayer, then your prayer is valid or invalid or whatever it happens to be, right? If you are in a metal cylinder and that metal cylinder is flying through the air and it is time for you to pray, then this is how you pray. How would that statement have been preserved?
Mustahil adatan, isn't it? It's societally
for them. It's
yeah.
You know, how would they? It would, you know. You imagine. I have received this hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. If you are on a giant metal cylinder, you know, flying through the air like a bird flies through the air, this is how you pray. And I then tell my students, the Prophet ﷺ said ... Right? And they'd be like, huh? What? Right? Now, when you are thinking about what to pass on to your children, are you going to pass on the thing about the flying metal cylinder? And if you do, it would end up being, there was something about a flying bird. If you're in a flying bird that's made of metal, and that would then become, if you are swallowed by a giant bird and the bird flies through the air, and it would become completely garbled, because the person will have no, what's the fiqh of mobile phones? What's the fiqh of, how would you understand what I'm saying? You get the point, right? How would you have the fiqh of a mobile phone?
Yeah.
Quran on a Quran, you know, if you had a magic crystal ball in which the words of the Quran appeared, when you summoned them, you would summon the words of Quran onto the crystal ball, and you could read them off the crystal ball, right? Unless somebody wants to communicate with you through the crystal ball, the palantir, if you're being precise. So communicate with you, in which case what would happen is you would have to do something with the crystal ball, so that the person came in front of you and the Quranic text went away, and then you'd have to re-summon the Quranic text after a while. How are you going to transmit? Even the way I'm doing it is based on crystal balls. Did Muslims did Sahaba in the time of the Prophet believe in crystal balls? No, this is flipping. I'm using an example from gypsies and, you know, and Lord of the Rings, for God's sake. Yeah. So these ideas would be impossible to transmit.
So that's the epistemological framework.
People would not have the tools to understand and therefore to transmit. But if you, and there's actually, the person who explains this really well is Ibn Rushd. Ibn Rushd wrote a work called Bidayat al-Mujtahid, the beginnings of the Mujtahid scholar, how to become basically a person capable of giving fatwa, right? And he says, the example that he quotes is, there is a person who has a shoe shop, a giant shoe shop, in which there are shoes of every type, every size, every color. If a person comes into the shoe shop, most 99% people who come into the shoe shop will find a shoe that fits them, that's the right color, right size, right style, and everything. But there'll be one person.
There's always one.
There's always one person when no shoe fits them. It's the Cinderella one, right? No shoe fits them, right? You just don't have a shoe for that person, and you can't help them. On the other side, you have a cobbler, and a cobbler knows how to make shoes. If all of those people come to him, that cobbler will be able to make a shoe that fits their foot, is the right size, the right color, the right shape. He said, to be a mufti, or to a mujtahid in his term, to be a mujtahid is to be a cobbler.
Wow.
Not to own a shoe shop.
Wow.
And it's the same thing here. What revelation does is provide a set of rulings first, then a set of principles by which from those rulings you can extract an infinite number of rulings. An infinite number of rulings. And that's what revelation provides you. But what it, and the fundamental principles, and this is where something like tasawwuf comes in, because the principle of tasawwuf ultimately is that the reaching of human perfection is not merely by what you do, it is by how you are.
Wow.
Right? And therefore it is effectively what Aristotle would call a virtue ethic.
Yep.
That the perfection of human beings is not necessarily in the perfection of their actions, but in the perfection of their personality. Right? And how do you acquire an elevated personality?
Eudaimonia.
And this is this is the eudaimonia of the human being. Is to attain to become a real human, which is about the perfection of one's personality and character. And this is the meaning of وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. When Allah says about the Prophet that you surpass the highest pinnacle of human character. وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Yeah? Translated often as you are upon a mighty character, or whatever. What it means is you surpass, you are beyond. Ala. The khuluqin azim is the highest possibility of what the human being can be, and you are at the top of that. You are atop that. Yeah? And that's why the sunnah becomes so critical. Not merely in what do I say, what do I do, how do I pray, and so forth, but how do I be, how do I respond, and so forth.
There's 2 points there. There's 200 points there, but 2 points
there.
Are. There's fundamentally you're making a distinction between the spirit of the law. We go to Montesquieu's framework, for example, and the letter of the law. But the question, I suppose, is with that distinction or contradistinction between having the entire corpus of tradition where everything is answered and having a framework, is it not impossible to have an approach where you follow the letter of the law? I.e., this goes to traditionalism, it goes to the qaid of the Zahidis, for example, where there's a complete rejection of that spirit.
Well, look, there is the letter of the law, and then there is its derivation. Then there is its derivation. There is the spirit of the law, and then there is its acquisition. Right? And the point here is firstly, the letter and spirit business, just be a little bit careful. That is a very Christian framing. And, people like Montesquieu, as much as they were not religious, and they were Enlightenment thinkers and so forth, but they are still acting on the basis of the environment in which they have been raised, which is a Christian environment.
How about istihsan?
Well, I'll come to that. So what Ghazali says the same thing, but he talks about the fiqh zahir and fiqh batin. So the fiqh that relates to, the fiqh here meaning not derivation of law, but understanding and application of revelation. There is an understanding and application of revelation that relates to one's behaviors, one's words and responses and so forth, how one deals with the outside world, and there is an understanding and application of the revelation as it relates to one's internal being. Right, that's the fiqh al-batin. So for Ghazali, the fiqh al-zahir is the first half of the ihya, the fiqh al-batin is the second half of the ihya. So the concept exists, but in both of those two things, there is what is explicitly mentioned in revelation, and then there is what is derivable from revelation in relation to your circumstance, for both the external and the internal. There's a way of deriving things. There's a way of determining how I should be in a particular situation, both in terms of my manner and in terms of my deportment, in terms of my internal disposition towards it. Right? So, an example. What's the difference between the two? I was giving class once, a long time before you. You're a young man, so it was you were probably in preschool. But I was giving a class once. It was about sabr. The class was about sabr. I'm talking about sabr. And one of the sisters puts a hand up and she says, my husband is a drug addict. He comes home every day, he's drunk or whatever, he beats me, beats the children, takes my money, whatever benefits money he gets, he spends it on drugs. The children go hungry, etc., etc. People say to me, I should have sabr. What's your advice? Ustad, I was Ustad at that time. What's your advice, Ustad? I said, have sabr and call the cops. And she said, what? I said, have sabr and call the cops. She said, what do you mean? I said, sabr is not an action. Sabr is not an action. Sabr is an internal disposition towards something. You can do nothing and be fuming and full of rage and malice on the inside, right? Or you can call the cops, but know that whatever has occurred to you is from the decree of Allah. Right? There's a difference between internal and external, and knowing the difference between the two is important. What you should do, how you should be. Muslims are always very concerned with what should we do. We should be more concerned with how to be. Now, issues of social hierarchies. I have not forgotten the question. Issues of social hierarchies. I have. Whether those hierarchies are faith-based hierarchies, like Muslims, non-Muslims, whether they are gender-based hierarchies, whether they are age-based hierarchies, parents and children, whether they are social status-based hierarchies, like free and slave, all of these hierarchies exist, and they exist in most societies in one form or another. Okay? The critical thing is not how do you completely flatten social hierarchies. Because if you could try, and experiments have been done to try to completely flatten social hierarchies, it does not end well.
Communism.
Well, what happens in communism, right, is La ilaha illa Lenin. Or it isn't. No, what was it? How did someone phrase it? La ilaha wa Lenin rasuluhu. Right? There is no God and Lenin is his prophet. Right? What you get in communism, which is this kind of utopia, you want to understand communism? Go and listen to the song Imagine by John Lennon. Seriously. Imagine by John Lennon is a Marxist manifesto hidden in it's a beautiful song. Beautiful song. I love that song. But it's a Marxist manifesto. Right? Imagine no possessions. It's easy if you try. Or however it goes. I wonder if you can. It's probably me, sorry. Imagine no possessions. It's easy if you can. Nothing to kill or die for. A brotherhood of man. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us and the world will be one. So the idea, that communist ideal is, from one perspective, a beautiful ideal. But it fell apart at the first contact with reality. Because people just aren't built like that. It's very interesting that actually in Imam Mosali, I think, in the beginning of he wrote a work called the Ikhtiyar, which is a work in fiqh.
Yeah.
In the beginning of the section on trade, he has this bit of introduction before he gets into the rules of trade. And what he says is, the rules of trade exist because of human weakness. If things were as they should be, then there would be no need for trade or exchange. Because people, if they had excess, they would give to those who did not have. And those who did not have would simply ask from those who had. And that would be all you needed.
Social altruism.
Yeah? It would just be, if people had rahmah, if people had rahmah, there would be no need for the fiqh of trade.
Wow.
But people are greedy and people are fearful, and there are strong people and weak people, and the rules exist to protect the weak from the strong.
Wow.
Right? And that is the way to understand everything after Hajj in fiqh is that. It is protecting people from one another. Protecting human beings from each other. That's the purpose of it. Now, you can argue about how much of it relates to the way in which you set up a society. And because the law takes into consideration custom and culture and so forth, there are varying formulations, of certain principles or certain rulings within fiqh, particularly gender relations, for example, and things like that. But the rules are there in order to facilitate that. Yeah. So there are always hierarchies in society. The question is, how do you relate to one another within those hierarchies? If you are in a position of strength, how does firstly the internal fiqh create such a disposition that you will not seek to take advantage of those below you or mistreat those below you? And if you are in a lower social position, how does the internal fiqh, the fiqh al-batin, change or purify your disposition so that you are not resentful of those above you and jealous of them? Okay? And if that is not possible, that is when the law steps in, the external law steps in, that even if you can't be that nice person, the law will stop you being a bad person. All right?
Nice.
So to argue that your conception or the Islamic conception of certain specific rights and differentials between them are mean because they are not the same as ours. It means that you do not believe in universal human rights is a complete straw man argument. And the best way to demonstrate that is not to be defensive, but to say, is to what about, like I did, citizen, non-citizen. Yeah. Will you say that they have exactly the same rights as each other? Yeah. And if you do, that's great, but the law doesn't. Yeah. The law very clearly distinguishes between this and that, right? If you say that, what about consent? What about the age of consent?
Yeah, no.
What about the age of voting? Why can't a 15-year-old vote? What happens magically at the age of 18? That a 17-year-old was it 18 now or 16? I can't remember. 16 now? It's going to be, or they haven't decided, have they? It depends on whether the party in charge will get more votes or not. But let's say it's 18. Are you not denying a universal human right to a 17-year-old when you say they can't vote, or can't drive, or can't drink? Are you not denying them a right? And in what way does that then link to this idea of universal human rights for everyone? Yeah.
Fundamentally, that goes back to legitimacy. When I went to Syria last year, I did a research project on the notion of internal legitimacy and external. This relates to what we're talking. External legitimacy. So internal is if I vote for a person and there's a mass amount of voting, there's some form of internal democratization, you could call it, and therefore that person is internally legitimate. Let's say Jawlani, for example, if you got enough votes, or there was voting is not necessary. It's more quantitative rather than qualitative. But let's say people supported the leader and there was a backing for that. That's internal legitimacy. But that doesn't necessarily equate to external legitimacy, which is on the global front.
No. Or is that person deserving of the position of power that you've given them?
But so who can decide that?
But that's the question. But that's the question, isn't it? Well, now you're into power structures.
This is a paradigmatic shift of
you're into power structures now. So, and is our power structures and social hierarchies determined by some form of meritocracy, right? Yeah. You know who really detested democracy? The great Athenian philosophers, the great peripatetic philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, detested it.
A lot of them got killed for it.
Because they said it is mob rule. They said that the masses can be... Plato certainly says, Plato is really against democracy, the idea of democracy. He said the masses can be swayed by a persuasive demagogue who makes illogical arguments that are harmful to those people. But he said, because of the way he says it in such a powerful way, they are persuaded and they will vote against their interests. So what's the solution, Plato? A philosopher king.
Yep.
A philosopher king. What's a philosopher king? Is a prophet, basically. Basically, it's a prophet. Yeah. One who effectively has isma, who is not capable of making errors. And who is so completely controlled their passions, their intellect so completely controls their passions that they will not act out of self-interest, out of anger, and etc., etc., etc. Yeah. So this, so even the idea we live in a democratic system. That's fine. Allah does not actually pronounce at all on the question of the constitutional questions. No. What type of society? Then therefore, it applies to all societies.
Yep.
But it is absolutely the case that the natural assumption made by pre-modern jurists, who are the vast majority of our tradition, is that the way in which societies work is that there is a monarch, or there is a group of people at the top who have gained power. Either their legitimacy is either through bloodline, or it is through conquest, or it is through some means like that. Yeah, there is a group of people who have influence and power in society, Ahlul Aqli wal Hilm, and those people take the decisions on the basis of the society.
Yeah. Therefore, is democracy even real? I was reading an amazing book recently. It was called, what was it called? Populist Revolution. Yeah, Populist Revolution. And one of the myths that it addresses there is in terms of democracy being real. I think it goes back to Plato. But I think...
what do you mean by real?
Exactly. Is democracy in terms of the external manifestation as to the social presuppositions that people have, i.e. the average man you see on the street, when you ask him what democracy means, he'll say...
One man, one vote.
Yeah, one man, one vote. But in reality, you've got proportional representation, then you've got first past the post. It's not even that.
Yeah. It isn't... how does that work? Is it, as you say, is it proportional representation? Is it an electoral college? Yep. Is it, is it a first past the post system? What happens if... what's very interesting about England is that for quite a long period of time, Britain did not take political parties and stuff very seriously. You guys probably won't remember this, But I remember an age where it doesn't really matter. Yeah, okay, you want your guys to get in, but it doesn't really make a difference. There is not a huge amount of difference between the parties. What really changed was Brexit. Brexit became a thing that polarized the society in a way that it had never been polarized before. Yeah, it was really startling the way it's kind of, actual hatred, of politicians who are on the wrong side of or whatever, or people who are on the wrong side of it. The idea of a politician, was it Joe Cox? The idea of a politician being murdered, being flat out murdered because you disagreed with her policy positions. It was complete anathema in Britain. But it's when an issue becomes so important, and then your vote is a knife edge vote, then it really starts to matter. If 49% of the population fundamentally disagree with a massive decision that will affect everybody's lives, what is so special about the fact that 51% of people do agree with it? Anyway, so lots of interesting things. But one of the things that we have, and it's important, so what our system allows is a form of holding to account. There is some mechanism by which we can hold to account. Well, that's it, accountability.
Checks and balances.
And that is important. That is important. And if you should never poo-poo that type of thing. You've got to look at some of the other societies in the world around us. You see what happens if there's no accountability at all. Yeah. Anyway,
guys, I want to open up to questions.
You mentioned the biopsychospiritual model. What's your opinion on Islamic psychotherapy and the works of Dr. Rahman at CMC?
I have a lot of time for it, obviously. And Dr. Othman in particular, I'll ask the second question first. I think he's very, very good. He's very well read. He's got a very good system in place. It's great. Yeah, it's great. Chef's kiss, no notes, right? Basically. But to go into that question in a bit more depth, when you talk about an Islamic psychotherapy, you need to understand what the adjective is doing. Right? What is the difference between psychotherapy and Islamic psychotherapy? Right? Now the issue that we have is we add this label in, but we do not add that label into secular. We do not talk about secular psychotherapy. We just talk about psychotherapy. And then, there's Islamic psychotherapy, which means almost like Islamic psychotherapy is just like one little bit, and then you have psychotherapy as a whole. Okay? So what makes a psychotherapy Islamic is the same thing that makes a therapy secular. This is really important. What is that adjective Islam doing? What it is speaking to is the underlying ontology and epistemology. Fancy word alert. What does that mean? Ontology means what is the nature of the human being from whom you are seeking to remove distress. What is the nature of the human? Their origin, their nature, and their purpose. And epistemology means what are your sources of knowledge about how to understand that human being. So from an Islamic perspective, we have a very specific, the word Islamic means we are applying a specific ontology of what it means to be human. In other words, the human as a being on a journey back to their creator. The human as a being whose life extends beyond this life into eternity. Right? And that's fundamental. Right? Because you don't only live once. You live twice, as the James Bond film said. You only live twice. Right? There are two lives you have to live, and therefore any well-being that you are aiming for has to not only take account of, but prioritize a well-being in eternity. First difference. Second, the word Islamic means we are applying a certain epistemology, which means we know about the nature of the human being from experience, from reason, and from revelation. Okay? Now, the difference between psychotherapy and Islamic psychotherapy is we make clear what our fundamental ontological and epistemological givens are. In secular psychotherapy, they don't. So let's look at that exact two questions from a secular perspective. What is the human? What is your ontology from a secular perspective about the human? What is the human being? Maybe the human being is as an educated ape, right? An educated ape. Maybe the human being is, the evolutionary, the result of an evolutionary process from hominids with, enhanced brain capacity, etc., etc., etc. That is the nature of the human. That is the origin of the human being. The nature of the human being is, is a being that is seeking to maximize its own pleasure, right? And the ultimate purpose of the human being is to attain maximal happiness before you die. And then you come to an end. And then you come to an end. Epistemologically, how do you understand? What are your sources of knowledge about to understand the human being? They are experience and reason, but not revelation. So the word Islamic means we are making explicit our underlying assumptions. The same, and because of that, we can demand that secular psychotherapy does the same thing. That secular psychotherapy needs also to show its cards. And I've done this. I've sat down with psychotherapists and said, what is the human? And they're like, what? I've done this with doctors. What is the human that you are treating? What is the nature of that human? How do you know if someone is ill? I have a whole paper on this, a 60-page paper on exactly this question. What is mental and what is illness? Yeah? Precisely in order to explore from a secular perspective what these terms actually mean, how they can be understood differently, and so forth, and how actually they fall short. Like, for example, as biological organisms, why do we seek health? Well, because health maximizes life. Okay, why do we as biological organisms seek to live? Why do we seek to avert death? Why? Now, that's not a question medicine can answer. You must preserve human life. Why? Why? Why is it seen as a good? Yeah? These are fundamental questions, and the philosophy of science does not answer them. It is the philosophy of religion that provides those answers. Religion, in its broadest possible sense, is that which gives ultimate meaning to human existence. Ultimate meaning. We all have meaning to our existence, but ultimate meaning to existence. It answers those ultimate questions. So that's what it is. So if you ask me what I think about Islamic psychology, I think it's a great thing for that reason. But within that, there are different approaches to what you might call an Islamic psychotherapy. One is an Islamically sensitive psychotherapy. So you're doing CBT or whatever it happens to be, and your therapist does not have to be Muslim, but they should be sensitive to what you believe and what you feel and what is important to you and so forth. Then there is an Islamically informed psychotherapy. Islamically informed psychotherapy, you're doing CBT, you're doing psychodynamics, whatever it is, but that the person is able to pull in, and because the Prophet ﷺ said this, or there's a Quranic verse that relates to this, or what have you, or Ghazali said this, you can pull in things from the Islamic tradition to make that therapy more understandable, more familiar, and therefore the patient to accept it more in order to get better. And then there is an actual Islamic psychotherapy. And an indigenous Islamic psychotherapy is one where the notion of what a human is, the notion of what the human existence is about, the sources from which you derive that knowledge are all from that basis. You bring forth a mechanism by which distress can be turned into afia, into well-being. Yeah? So that's my understanding of it. Sorry, it's a lot. If you wanted a short answer, you're asking the wrong person that question. Inshallah.
Eid?
I was having a discussion with a brother earlier on the point of what it means to be a leader in our society. To pick on a particular issue, what do you think about Muslims entering UK politics. On the one hand, people can say, Muslims entering the politics and reaching the upper echelons of society, you can have some sort of change, making the country more Muslim friendly or raising awareness on whatever issues. But on the other hand, some people will say, okay, the system is naturally corrupt. Can you even make meaningful change within a corrupt system? Secondly, there might be some compromises that you have to make, maybe on, say, LGBTQ circumstances. And are those compromises worth maybe a longer term good in that sort? So how do you go about that sort of issue?
This question really relates to the way in which Muslims engage in wider society. And actually, it's not as modern day specific as you might think. Okay, basically from the time, let's say after Khilafah Rashida, right? There has to have been, if you are engaged in, if you wish to climb the ladder, the social ladder, there is always some kind of compromise that will need to be made, potentially, if you want to be within the system. And the question of, is this more of a benefit than a harm, is a very good question. Yeah, and it's probably best to take a broad approach on this issue, right? Because we assume this is we're in a non-Muslim country and this and that, and you were in the Umayyad court. If you're one of the Salaf in the Umayyad court, there have been lots of things that horrified you. Yeah, and the question of is this even worth it? If you wish to effect change in society as an individual, so there are two basic approaches you can take. You can try to affect society positively from within, or affect society positively from outside the power structures. Right, within the power structures, and then outside the power structures. Yeah. What you probably need is a combination of both, and both of them need to recognize the value of the other. So you need people on the outside who are who represent an ideal, right? And whose role largely would be about, this is bad and you're criticizing this and so on and so on and so forth. And you need those on the inside who are trying to bring about institutional or structural changes, and who will need to keep quiet about certain things, in order to remain within the system to bring about the long-term changes. The difficulty we have is that those two do not recognize each other as allies. They consider each other to be enemies. Those on the inside, these guys don't understand what we're doing. They're just these flipping Morvi Saabs. It's so easy to stand on the outside and shout, right? It's easy to be the easiest job in the country, leader of the opposition. Easiest job in the country. Everything's bad, everything's wrong, whatever idea you have, it's a bad idea. You don't have to give your idea. You just have to say it's a bad idea. Right? Your job is to critique. All right? It's like a food critic. You don't have to cook the food. You just eat the food and then complain about it. Basically, right? So that's what they'll say about the people on the outside. Yeah? What are they actually doing? Right? They are fools. They are like this. They are like that. People on the inside, what do the people on the outside say about them? They are turncoats, they are traitors, they are coconuts, they what, right? Okay? And what's interesting is that both sides at best consider the other to be hopelessly idealistic. Those on the inside consider those on the outside to be hopelessly idealistic and unrealistic about what effect they're likely to have. Those on the outside consider those on the inside to be hopelessly idealistic about their ability to change a system that is so embedded. Yeah? There's no easy answer to this question. But the way to do this is to go back to the first point that you made. What does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to be a leader? Yeah? Now, the Arabic word, the Quranic term for leader in the broadest sense of the word is uswa. And uswa means an exemplar. that you are an exemplar, right? The Prophet ﷺ is called an exemplar. Ibrahim ﷺ is called an exemplar, and all the prophets are exemplars. And what do you find in this system? Well, you find most of the prophets are on the outside, but not all. But not all, right? Some of them are on the inside. The most salient example of that is Yusuf ﷺ. Where is Yusuf? Yusuf is a minister in the court of the Malik, of Egypt. And he even says, I have to remain within the law of the land. What I need to do has to remain within the law of the land. He is not seeking, fascinatingly, this is why the story of Yusuf ﷺ is so unique in the Quran. Yusuf ﷺ does not preach to the Malik of Egypt. He is not trying to convert the Malik of Egypt. He's not. Because that's not the person he has been sent to guide. Yeah, that's not the person he's been sent to guide. Right? Who is he? Who is Yusuf? I want to answer this question, but you ask yourself the question. Go read Surah Yusuf and ask yourself, who is Yusuf the prophet to?
Oh.
To which people is Yusuf alayhi salam sent? Because if he's sent to the people of Egypt, what's he doing? What's he doing? Yeah? Now then, so you have exemplars. What makes them stand out? What makes them stand out is that they have a very strong, they have the prophets, they have the strongest possible sense of who they are, what their relationship with Allah is, what their fundamental goal is, and they are uncorruptible from that perspective. If there is a compromise they have to make, it is only a compromise. It is not a compromise that affects them. The power does not corrupt them. It is a compromise that is made in the pursuit of that longer term goal. Yeah? The real question, therefore, is if you wish to go into something like this, is how do you inoculate yourself against the decay and the corruption that will inevitably surround you? How do you bring about change? And, effectively, to what extent can you compromise, and where can you not compromise? Yeah? And that is really where, I am very much against ulama becoming involved in political processes. But I'm not at all against ulama advising those involved in political processes. I think for a politician to have a sheikh, or to have a group of sheikhs to whom they can go back to, and it's not public, it's private, right? It's like a mentor. It's private discussions. It's Chatham House rules. It's, look, these are the things. What do you think I should do? They can be that free flow of ideas and exchange, interrogation of their, of their, intentions and their niyyah and how they might be changing and so forth. And is this working? Is it not working? When is the time to say no? Actually, as a matter of principle, I need to step out from this. When is it better to keep silent? And for those things to remain within closed doors, and for those ulama to either not formally be associated with that person, or to not say anything about what that person does at that point. Yeah, I think that is really important. But because we live in a society where everything has to be shared, yeah, that's really problematic. There are certain things that need to be kept confidential. I was talking to a group of ulama, and we were having a very lengthy discussion about a particular topic. And this chap who was, he kind of says, "Oh, I'm going to do a live stream about this." And it's like, you're going to do a live stream about what? Oh, all the things that we've been talking about. Yeah? And it's like, this is a private group, right? The discussions here are discussions that we have. You don't bring these things out to the public because it will confuse them, right? You are, there's only a certain amount of people can say. You guys talking about voting before, right? People are single issue voters. Most people don't give two hoots about politics, right? If Donald Trump, I guarantee you, if the American economy picked up, right? If inflation came down, growth went up in the American economy, yeah, Donald Trump would get voted back into a third term. Whether he was breaking the constitution, whether he had screwed up in Iraq or in Iran, whatever, it wouldn't matter. None of it would matter. His personal morality would not matter. People vote on their pocketbooks. That's what they care about. Because when you walk into that voting booth, you are not playing four-dimensional chess. You are thinking of one thing, and that's what you'll vote on. Andy Burnham comes into power on the power of what exactly? Ideas? Give me one idea that Andy Burnham mentioned, other than Manchesterism, whatever the heck that is. I'm from Manchester, but whatever the heck that is. Give one thing that he said that people knew about. It wasn't that. It was his vibes, man. It's vibes. He seems like a genuine guy.
Yeah.
I hope he is a genuine guy. Yeah? But people don't consider these things. So don't bring out complex topics to them. But we don't, as a Muslim community, what we lack, and I've said this for many years, is political maturity. We really lack as a community, we lack political maturity. Yeah? And that's hugely problematic when you are trying to be a minority community that has a distinct identity within the UK. You need to be politically clever. Jewish people are very politically astute. They are. And we need to learn from them. Irish people are not particularly politically astute. And we need to learn the lessons from that. We have communities that come before us. A lot of our fiqh and so forth is based on the assumption, we're talking about assumptions, right? It is based on the assumptions that Muslims are large and in charge. And we are not large and in charge. We are not large and in charge.
So how do we become politically astute? Practically?
I think it's education. I hear people give this question, should we interact with the government? And I'm like, which bit? I mean, seriously, which bit of the government? Westminster? Whitehall? Downing Street? Local authority? Mayoralty? Council? Which bit of the government do you mean? The government has levels. We don't know that. It's the government. Civil service haven't changed. The cabinet will change. Civil service are the same. Who do you think actually takes the decisions? Who does the work? If you wanted, you guys are all politics. Half of you are politics grads, I think.
Yeah, sort of quite a
Some of
few
you are?
politics, yeah.
How do you influence policy? Write your MP. Is that how you influence policy? Write your MP. If you wanted to influence policy, what would you do? Where are the levers of authority?
What was that, revolution?
No.
So that's another John Lennon. I once had, don't ask where and how, but I was in a kind of a small group seminar with Mary McGuinness. I always get a name wrong. It's not Mary McGuinness, it's something like that. But she was the former president of the Republic of Ireland. And she was involved in the Northern Ireland Peace Accords. It's a Good Friday Agreement. Yeah? So she was a signatory of the Good Friday Agreement. This is like very, very, very senior politician. I mean, very, very, very senior Irish politician. She'd grown up in Northern Ireland. She was involved in the Troubles. Her house had been shot up. They'd had to run out of their house because they'd been firebombed. The full works. I mean, she was like fully, And she was giving us a talk, and I said, the Irish were a persecuted, marginalised, and despised minority in this country. The Jews were a persecuted, marginalised, despised minority in this country. And now the Muslims are a persecuted, marginalised, despised minority in this country. What do you think that our community should learn from the experience of your community? Yeah? What do you think our community should learn from your community? And what she said is, you need to know who to talk to. She said, when I was the president of the Republic of Ireland, the Taoiseach, that right? The Taoiseach or whatever of Ireland, or whatever she was. I'm not sure if it's the same thing. She said there were, I think this is the Birmingham 5, these guys that were kind of convicted of an IRA bombing, and eventually they were released, right? After like 30 years they were released because it was a wrongful conviction. She said, I tried for years and years and years to get the British government to take a look at the case of the Birmingham 5, and I used all my contacts in the government. And this is someone who had signed the flipping Northern Ireland Peace Accords. I mean, she would have had, Tony Blair's phone number. She would have, what's the other guy? Was the other guy involved in that? Jonathan Powell or whatever. She would have had these guys' phone numbers. Yeah? Not able to do anything. She said, one day, I was in some fancy doodah thing, and there was somebody from the House of Lords who was their Lord so and so, and I kind of mentioned it to him. He said, "Oh, don't worry, my dear, I'll sort it out for you, no problem." And he goes up to the House of Lords, and he stands up in the House of Lords, and he gives a kind of a private members thing or whatever, and he gives a talk about all the things that he had heard and about the travesty, the travesty of the Birmingham Five and the government used to do it. And then it got taken. She said within 6 months they were released. I tried for 10 years. When I spoke to the right person, within 6 months they were released.
It's not what you know, it's who you know.
So, what does political maturity mean? Firstly, it means knowing who you are as a community. Knowing what your purpose is here as a community. What is our purpose here as a community, by the way? What are we doing here? We know why our parents came here, our grandparents came here. They came here for a better economic life. None of our parents came here to do da'wah. Let's not be out of the bush here. None of our parents came here for da'wah. They came here for economics. What are we here for? Well, first, we're here because we've got nowhere else to go. You're not going to be welcome back in Pakistan, right, or whatever. You're not. What are you? What is? So you're here. Are you here to do what everyone else does? You're trying to get ahead in life, right? Or as a community, are we here because kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas? That we have a responsibility to be moral anchors in the society. And if we have a responsibility to be moral anchors, where do we focus that morality? On what issues should that morality be focused? As a community, what are, number one, the most important issues? Faith. There's nothing more important than faith, man. You can do whatever you can do, all you like with LGBT stuff, right? If the person doesn't enter Islam, what's going to happen to them? They're human beings. They have a life in this world. They have an eternal life in the next world, right? That's our fundamental interest, is people attaining salvation. But that is often the furthest thing away from what we can actually achieve. So there's your area, your sphere of interest, your sphere of influence. And knowing what your sphere of interest is, which is the whole of the deen of Islam, but then knowing what your sphere of influence is. What are you most likely to be able to provide moral leadership about? LGBTQ? Environment? The environment? Social justice? Right? What are the things where you are most like, we as a community are most likely, with our beliefs, with our approach to ethics, with the prophetic example, most likely to be able to influence change positively? Ask yourself that question for a moment. Yeah, ask yourself that question before you start talking about how do we do it? How do we change things? Which buttons do we press? Should we go into government? Yeah, but wait, what change are you trying to bring about? Ask that question first. What change are you trying to bring about? If you can't answer that question, why are you going to the how? And often people jump over the what and the why, and they go to the how. When they actually get into those positions, what do they now do? What do they think they're trying to do? And it's opportunistic. It'll either be about, well, it's my neighborhood and therefore it's about the bins and and that kind of stuff, or getting some more investment into my community, and therefore I have to compromise to get the investment into my community. Or it's about banner issues like Gaza or Israel or what have you, which again, you're very unlikely to be able to change the government's position if you're an MP. Right? So what are you trying to do? If you don't know what you're trying to do, why are you asking how to do it? That's what I mean by political maturity.
Someone write that down.
Ask another question.
Yeah, you got one first.
Sheikh, I had a question on a more lower level personal leadership. If someone's given opportunity for a role, whether that's teach children or individuals, so if they're given that opportunity based on what little knowledge they have and someone sees potential in them, if they themselves feel they're weighed down by sin, how do they navigate that feeling? If they're given an opportunity but they don't feel they deserve it because of what they've done?
Ignore that, basically. I should probably slightly preface that. So okay, the first point is, if only sinless people are allowed to do any teaching, right, then teaching is over. Teaching ended the day the Prophet made wisal. Right? Then it's only the question of to what extent and how much and so on and so forth. Right? But the fact of the matter is, firstly, understand that it is often through the responsibility that you are given to teach others that you yourself learn and actually properly imbibe it. That's the first thing. You also do need to make sure, however, that you are confident that you are not going to bring about more harm than good. Whether that harm is spiritual harm, whether that harm is other forms of harm. Okay? You got to know yourself well enough to know that. For most people, that's not the case. The third thing is know the limits of your knowledge. Know what you know, but more important, know what you don't know. Right? And if you're asked about something that you don't know who you can ask. That's that thing I was talking about, being connected. Know who you can go back and ask. Yeah? That gets you out of a lot of trouble. Yeah? So always recognize that if you are given a leadership role, Allah has put that role in your way in order for you to firstly improve yourself. Right? Improve yourself by virtue of that burden of responsibility. I guarantee you, most ulama only really learn the stuff that they are teaching when they start to teach it. Yeah, the way, I'll tell you this for free, the way you read the texts or whatever before you have to teach it is not the way you read it when you had to write an exam on it. Because when you had to write an exam on it, you're only aiming at the pass mark.
Mm.
As long as I get the pass mark, it's fine. When you are teaching that stuff, firstly, you feel that weight of responsibility. And if you don't feel that, if you don't feel a reluctance to take on the role, then you shouldn't take it.
Mm.
If you feel reluctance to take on the role, then you should take it. You understand that? Yeah? The thing about leadership is that the people who want to be leaders probably shouldn't be leaders. The people who probably should be leaders don't want to be leaders. Yeah? That's the grand irony of this. Alright? So if you have that reluctance, that's a good thing. Make sure you keep it. Make sure there's always a bit of imposter syndrome. What am I doing here? I'm not that now. Now, I've been teaching for 30 years. I still have, what am I doing here? Why am I teaching people? Why am I guiding people? Me. Yeah? That's really important to have, because that's what checks you. Keeps your ego in check. Okay? Always know who you can refer to, and always know the limits of what you know. But when you are learning something, or you're reading something in order to teach it, you think about it in a different way. It's a different pedagogical process that you go through. Because now you're thinking not about how do I imbibe it, you're thinking how do I explain it. And how do I explain it is a very different way of learning. Yeah? I got really good at the subjects that I teach just before I started to teach them. Yeah? Okay?
One more question.
Ladies?
No, it's okay. That's okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
I know I give long answers, sorry.
You got a hopeful face. I'll go to Munir first, then I'll go to you.
In terms of leadership again, on the first point you brought up about the 5 points, has your view on the 5 domains changed based on what Dr Asim said?
Of course it has.
In what way?
I'll give the man a bit of time to think about it.
Come back to me in a few weeks, and I need to rewatch this. Go ahead.
Our syllabus is going to change.
You'll find a lot of these insights and realizations ultimately revolve around the same sorts of things.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah, Maslow didn't read Ghazali. Yeah.
On the point of universal rights, you gave quite an intellectual argument as like a comeback to slavery,
Yeah.
women issues,
Mhm.
and there was one other thing, non-Muslims. I feel those kind of intellectual and philosophical arguments work very well for intellectual audiences, right? Like it will work very well for us. But how do we take that and apply it to the masses. And I'll give you a very particular example. And imagine, so you're the person in this scenario. So say like a woman, say comes up to a woman and says, "Oh, Omar, you speak of human rights in Islam and all these things, but why is it then that I've read about, say, concubines in Islam and how some scholars have said, you know, even how they were treated as property, they're not free women, so they don't have to wear hijab, and there's no idea of consent even. How do we square all these things, and you're over here speaking about rights? So how can you then have someone ask a question like that and then start speaking about social hierarchies?
These are massively important questions, right? These are the types of questions that cause people to leave Islam.
Yeah.
Slaves, women, non-Muslims, heaven, hell, right? These sorts of issues. These are jihad. These are the big issues that will cause people to leave Islam, right? And how you approach that question really does depend on who you're talking to, right? And there is what you might call a tadarruj in this, right? A tadarruj is there needs to be a laddered approach, right? Depending on the sophistication of the question and the sophistication of the person is the sophistication of the answer. Yeah? So the question of slavery, for example, yeah? And I remember I looked at this question from I remember looking at this question, somebody asked this question in a conference once, that how could somebody as intellectually, as intellectual and, and righteous as Ghazali have condoned an institution as manifestly evil as slavery. That was the way the question was phrased. And the speaker, who came from the Middle East, was stunned, was just shocked by the question itself, and said, no, we don't agree with slavery. That was it. We don't agree with slavery. That was his answer. Slavery has been abolished in the Muslim world for 100 years. Right? Which is irrelevant, because that's not what the question's asking. And this question, and I went up to the sister who asked the question afterwards, and I said, you asked the question, it's an interesting question. And I sat down with her, and I said, the first thing to understand is this. You got, and I again had to assess, right? A simple way of assessing this. The Prophet ﷺ, he freed slaves. He freed slaves. It is actually a great virtue in Islam to free slaves. Now, if a person is at a basic level, how can there's slavery in Islam? Yeah, but we are encouraged to free slaves. So in a society where there are slaves, we are encouraged to free them. We don't make them, and we're encouraged to free them. Done. If that's all they need to settle the iman, done. Right? If it comes to something deeper than that, you've got to have a deeper answer. And ultimately it comes down to, why does this, you've got to know for yourself why this question matters to that person. Right? Why this question matters to that person. Why does an institution that no longer exists matter so much to an individual? Right? To an individual today. And what it comes down to is Islam moral? That's the question that they're actually asking. Is Islam moral? Because slavery is immoral, Islam permits slavery, and therefore Islam cannot be moral. That's the syllogism. You've got to take the syllogism apart. It's not an easy thing to do, yeah, and certainly not over the internet and that kind of stuff, right? But it's something that has to be done, yeah. And I remember stating, saying to somebody, I said to this same sister, I said, look, have you considered that slavery was a practice of virtually every civilization on the face of the earth until the mid-19th century? Every single civilization on the face of the earth, including British civilization, right? Either you have to argue that there has been a moral evolutionary leap that human beings took specifically in 1850 or whatever it was, yeah? Or you have to argue that and therefore the greatest moral thinkers in all of human history, none of them advocated for abolishing slavery. So what does slavery mean? what you are thinking of slavery. And I give this one chap asked me recently. Somebody asked me this. My God! And I said, I give him a story about Richard Burton. When Richard Burton went to Egypt, he said he's sitting with this particular sheikh, and next to the sheikh is sitting another person who's very well dressed, very erudite, and they're having a conversation about philosophy or whatever it happens to be, And then a young boy comes in, and he's got some tea. So he kind of pours the tea, and he kind of makes a mistake and he spills the tea, right? And so the sheikh kind of gives him a clap. Idiot, you fool! What's wrong with you? Can't you even do anything right? Go and get us another cup of tea, right? Sends him away. Yeah, and then Richard Burton says, the man sitting next to the sheikh was his slave. The boy who brought the tea was the sheikh's son.
Wow.
Was the sheikh's son. Think about that for a minute when you think about slavery.
Mm-hmm. What
does this actually mean? What did it actually mean to the people there? What you and I mean when we think about slavery is gladiators in the Colosseum and the transatlantic slave trade. That's what we mean. But that's not how slavery was experienced for most of human history. So you've got to be clear on what you mean. And Jonathan Brown's book is very good on this.
Yeah, slavery in Islam.
But understand that you may give them a very good answer, right? But you're not answering the question that they're really asking. The question they're really asking, is Islam moral? And how do you demonstrate that answer? That's what really matters. Yeah. So in those scenarios, I sometimes say that a Muslim, your approach to a Muslim who has left Islam and your approach to somebody who has never entered Islam is very different. I would say 80% of Muslims that leave Islam leave because of some type of trauma. Now they may wrap that trauma up in a whole lot of intellectual arguments about evolution and whatever it happens to be. You get through those things and you'll find that there's a trauma there. Yeah, I was talking to a sister from Somalia about this. She said, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in the Prophet, I don't believe in any of it. I just don't. Yeah, and we started talking and she said, oh, well, Richard Dawkins and blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, okay. And then it got to it. And what it got to was exactly what you'd expect. She'd been sexually abused when she was 9 years old. Her family had come to know about it, they'd covered it up. Yeah? And that was Islam to her. If you're in power, you can do evil to somebody vulnerable, and everyone around you will not stand up for you, will not protect you. And that's Islam. Yeah? And she told me, I don't want to talk about it. She said, you may be right, but I don't want to talk about it. And I said to her, the family said to me, what should we do? I said, get her counselling. Get her counselling. She's been sexually abused. She needs counselling. Once she has dealt with the trauma, every time you bring up Islam, you're bringing up her rape. That's what you're bringing up. When you talk to a guy who's beaten to a pulp by the Maulvi in the masjid, every time you mention Islam, every time you mention masjid, triggering him. The man's having a PTSD when you take him to the masjid. Because he remembers getting beaten as a child. He remembers the fear he experienced. Yeah? Understand what that word means to her. It doesn't mean the same thing as it means to you. You can't help them with that. You're not going to help them with no intellectual argument is going to work. This doesn't beat this, ever. Yeah. I have to go just now, but yeah, okay.
No, it's fine. It's just a quick question. In that case, it should be a short yes or no. Does the mind, therefore, in its capabilities of creating beliefs and emotions, overpower the heart? But if we see the heart as the one that receives faith, then how can the mind overpower the heart?
Wait, look at what I would say to you. Look at where you're pointing.
Well, in terms of this,
think about where you're pointing. I did the same thing. Does the mind not create emotions?
Yeah.
Where is faith received?
The heart.
Where's the heart? There's the question. There's your question. Faith is fragile. You can lose your grip on faith for all sorts of reasons. Cognitive reasons, emotional reasons, social reasons, even physical reasons.
So you can strengthen it through...
And you can strengthen it through the same things. You strengthen it through the same things. Your physical deeds act, effectively all your physical actions in Islam act as affirmations of the belief. Yeah, so yeah.
Sheikh, thank you for your time.
Barakallahu feekum.
Appreciate it.
Assalamu alaikum wa
وعليكم
rahmatullahi
السلام
wa
ورحمة الله.
barakatuh.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. قولوا قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين وأتوب إليه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.